A plague does not need a banner. It does not march with drums. It does not shout its name from the hilltop. It slips beneath doors, rides in fleas, hides in grain sacks, waits in the warmth of crowded rooms, and kisses the sleeping mouth before the victim ever knows the enemy has entered. In 1111 imperial calendar, the empire began to cough. At first, the officials blamed bad air, then tainted wells, then refugees, then rats, ordinary rats, sensible rats, rats that could be trapped, burned, counted, and forgotten. But in the margins of the plague ledgers, another truth survived. A little mark scratched beside the dead, a hunched shape, a narrow snout, a curled tail, a rat standing like a man. Beneath a sealed Sigmarite chapter house, Witch Hunter Matthias Krieger opens a black oak case bound in lead and makes his apprentice, Tomas Reikert, read the casualty lists aloud, village by village, household by household, child by child. He reads until the numbers become faces. He reads until laughter turns to shame. He reads until the silence beneath the floor begins to scratch back. The Black Plague was no accident. It was made, forged in filth by a hidden enemy the Empire has spent centuries denying. An enemy beneath the streets, beneath the granaries, beneath the plague pits and palace cellars. An enemy that does not need mankind to worship it, only to disbelieve in it. Tonight, Tomas will learn why gates were sealed with the living still inside, why corpse carts vanished before dawn, why witnesses were whipped for telling the truth, why officials crossed out impossible words and wrote wolves, fever, panic, bad air. And he will learn the name Mandred Skavenslayer, the man who forced the Empire to look downward into the tunnels, into the dark, into the place where yellow eyes waited and laughed. So listen carefully. When a witness speaks of claws beneath the floor, do not smile. When a child says the drain has eyes, do not comfort yourself with reason too quickly. When the ledger says missing instead of dead, ask what carried the bodies away, because disbelief is a fortress with no walls, and the rats are already inside. Chapter 1. The Rat Mark in the Margin. The case was made of black oak and sealed with lead. That was the first thing Tomas Reikert noticed when Matthias Krieger carried it into the archive chamber. Not dragged, not ordered some sweating underling to fetch it, carried it himself, with both gloved hands beneath the weight, as if the thing inside were not merely old paper but a sleeping charge of powder waiting for a spark. It was long and narrow, the size of a coffin for a child who had died before growing into his bones. Iron bands crossed its lid. Each band was stamped with the hammer of Sigmar, but the marks had been struck over older symbols Tomas did not recognize. Hooked lines, clustered dots, tally cuts, and one ugly little shape that looked almost like a tail. The seals were layered thick at the corners. Red wax, black wax, white wax, brown by age. One seal bore the mark of the cult of Sigmar, another the mark of an imperial chancery. A third had been impressed with no holy sign at all, only the words, Plague Records. 1111, 1115. I see, not for public copy. Tomas read the inscription twice. Plague Records? He asked. Matthias set the case upon the iron table. The vault door stood open behind him, though only a crack. Beyond it, the corridor descended into blackness, smelling faintly of damp stone, cold ashes, and old prayers. The witch hunter's lantern burned low beside the case, its flame trapped behind smoked glass. It gave the room the color of old bruises. "Not plague records," Matthias said. "A grave with hinges." Tomas shifted his satchel higher on his shoulder. His wounded arm, still bandaged from the lesson of bone dust and forbidden necromancy, ached when the strap pressed against it. He had learned not to complain. Pain, Matthias had told him, meant the body had not yet surrendered its argument. "From the Great Plague?" Tomas asked. "The Black Plague," Matthias corrected. "The Great Plague. The rat years. The empty winter. The 4-year bell. Every province gave it a different name, because every province needed a word for the same horror." He drew a ring of keys from inside his coat. They were not the same keys he had used for the Vault of Oaths, nor the silver-black key he had used for the bone dust reliquary. These were smaller, meaner, chancery keys built for cabinets, lockboxes, sealed evidence, and the quiet machinery of governments that preferred ink to screaming. "The plague began in 1111 IC, Matthias said. By 1115, the Empire had learned to count corpses better than taxes. Tomas watched the first key enter the lock. He could not help himself. People say the plague came from bad air. Rot in the wells, too many wars, too many refugees, the usual filth of towns. Matthias paused. People say many things. The second lock opened. In the Reichland, a brewer once told me rats grew large as dogs beneath Nuln and stood upright to smoke pipes. In Middenland, a priest laughed in my face when a dying woman swore the sewers had eyes. In Telabakland, a magistrate ordered a witness whipped for claiming he had seen men with rat heads dragging bodies under a mill. In Altdorf, a professor wrote 300 pages proving such creatures could not exist because no accepted taxonomy permitted them. The third lock clicked. "What happened to the professor?" Tomas asked. His skeleton was found beneath his study, with its legs gnawed down to the hip. Matthias opened the case. The smell came out first. Not rot. Rot had life in it. Rot was wet, generous, busy with worms and flies. This was drier. Old linen, vinegar, smoke, powdered lime, rats' nests. And underneath, almost too faint to name, the sweet sour stench of sickness preserved in paper. Inside lay ledgers, dozens of them, bound in cracked leather, mildew-spotted parchment, warped boards, stitched plague bills, rolls of casualty lists, village seals broken and resealed, temple death registers tied in black thread. Some had corners gnawed away. Some had been burned at the edges. One was wrapped in oiled cloth and tied with a strip of priest's stole. Tomas leaned closer, curiosity already rising. Matthias struck him across the wrist with 2 fingers. Not hard enough to injure, hard enough to sting. "Do not touch until I tell you." Tomas withdrew his hand. "Are they cursed?" "No." "Then why?" "Because men died to write them. Show respect." That silenced him more effectively than any warding sign. Matthias lifted the first ledger with care. Its cover was brown leather, cracked like dried mud. A faded label had been pasted to it. Wordbad partial mortality accounts, winter through spring, 1112 IC. The witch hunter opened it halfway and turned it toward Tomas. "Read." Tomas blinked. "The names?" "The names." He cleared his throat and began. "Edelbrecht Kauer, wife, Margrethe, sons, Lothar and Clemens, daughter, Ilse, all taken in fever, 3rd day after Candlemas." His voice sounded too loud in the chamber. "Continue. Old Mother Gert, found dead beside oven, black swelling under arms. No kin living, burned with bedding. Continue. Baker's apprentice, name unknown, presumed from Fieldorf, bled from mouth, carted without rights by order of bailiff. Continue." Tomas read. At first the names were words, ink, record, history, a safe distance from suffering. But the pages did not end. Line followed line, each one a little door into a room full of death. Hans, son of Ulrich, age 7, found beneath stairs. Brigitta, widow, hands blackened, tongue swollen. 2 infants of the Duck's household, unbaptized, buried outside wall by emergency order. Matthias did not interrupt. Tomas read until his throat roughened. A family found locked inside their cottage after neighbors reported smell. Father dead by door, mother dead in bed. 3 children in loft, youngest alive when found, died before sunset. His voice faltered. "Louder!" Matthias said. Tomas looked up. The witch hunter's face was stern, unblinking, carved in lantern light. "Louder," he repeated. They were counted quietly once. Do not bury them quietly twice. Tomas swallowed and read louder. Cart driver Oswald Frey, crushed beneath load of corpses when rear axle broke, found with plague swellings, burned with cargo. Matthias nodded once. Good. Good? True. Tomas pressed on. The list became a rhythm. Name, household, symptom, disposal. Name, household, symptom, disposal. The dead passed beneath his tongue until his mouth tasted of ash and ink. Then he saw the mark. It sat in the left margin beside a block of entries from a village called Helmgart Minor, not written by the same hand, not inked with the same pen, scratched into the parchment with something sharp enough to score the page. A rat, not a natural rat, though it had whiskers, a narrow muzzle, hunched shoulders, and a tail curled beneath it. This creature stood upright. Its little hands were raised as if holding a blade or staff. Around it were 3 dots arranged in a triangle. Tomas stopped reading. Matthias waited. "What is that?" Tomas asked. "What does it look like? A rat. Does it?" Tomas frowned. "A crude one." "Crude things may still be accurate." The apprentice leaned closer, despite himself. The rat mark had been gouged deeply. Whoever carved it had done so in haste or terror. The parchment around it was stained darker, as though wet fingers had pressed there. "There are peasant charms like this," Tomas said. "Against vermin. Against bad grain. Against blame," Matthias said. Tomas looked at him. The witch hunter turned the ledger back and tapped the mark with one gloved fingernail. "This is why I brought you here." "A margin drawing?" A witness too frightened to write a sentence. Tomas stared at the small, ugly shape. "You mean Skaven. He said the word lightly, too lightly. It slipped out, carrying the tone of tavern rumor and market laughter, the old reflex of educated men toward stories told by ditch diggers and swineherds. Matthias's eyes lifted. The temperature in the room seemed to fall. "Read the next entry." Tomas hesitated. "Read it." He looked down. Helmgart Minor. Village sealed by order of provincial authority. After 186 reported dead, 43 missing, 27 unaccounted for due to fire. The next. Testimony suppressed. 2 surviving boys claimed bodies were taken at night by... Tomas stopped. The word had been scraped away, not faded, removed. A knife had worried the parchment until a pale wound replaced the text. Matthias pointed to the margin. And beside the missing word, the rat mark. The next. Mill discovered empty. Granary floor undermined. Blood trails leading beneath foundation. No animal tracks identifiable due to ash and snow. The next. Priest Verholt found hanged from chapel beam. No suicide note. Hands bound behind back. Tomas's voice slowed. Matthias reached into the case and drew out a second document. This one folded in quarters and sealed with black wax. He broke it and laid it open. A casualty list. Columns of numbers marched down the page. Village names, households, living, sick, dead, missing, burned, sealed, unknown. "Read the totals," Matthias said. Tomas did. By the 6th village, his tone had changed. By the 9th, the old smirk had died entirely. By the 12th, he no longer said Skaven like a joke. There were too many missing. Not dead. Missing. Plague killed ugly, but it left bodies. Bloated bodies. Black-spotted bodies. Bodies curled around their own pain. Bodies with blood dried under the nose. Bodies crawling with fleas. Bodies that had voided themselves in bed. Bodies dragged out by hooks and stacked in lime pits. But missing was different. Missing meant holes under walls. Cellars torn open from beneath. Cradles empty but bloody. Sick beds stripped. Corpses taken before morning carts arrived. Watchmen gone from locked gates. Priests vanished between midnight bells. Matthias produced another ledger. This one had teeth marks along the lower edge. Talagard dock accounts, he said. 1,113 IC. The river carried more than barges. Tomas opened his mouth, then closed it. Read. He read. Cargo refused due to stink. 3 corpses found in grain sacks. 6 dock hands dead after unloading hides. 2 boatmen taken by fever. 1 child recovered from river. Throat cut. Plague buboes present. River patrol reports scratching beneath wharf. Complaint dismissed. 2nd complaint punished as panic-mongering. 3rd complainant missing. Beside that line, again, the rat mark, not inked, burned. Someone had taken a heated nail or wire and scorched it into the page. Tomas touched his prayer beads without thinking. Matthias saw. Now you pray. I was not laughing. You were near enough. The words struck harder because they were calm. Tomas looked at the ledgers spread before him. The dead lay in columns. The Empire had swallowed them and made them numbers. Yet in the margins, something else survived. Little rat figures, clawed marks, tails, triangular dots, scratched warnings where official language had failed or been forced to fail. "Why not write plainly?" Tomas asked. "If someone saw them, why not write it?" Matthias's smile was thin and humorless. "Because officials fear panic more than death. That cannot be true." "Cannot?" The witch hunter selected another page and shoved it toward him. This one was a memorandum from a provincial administrator. "Certain claims of subterranean vermin men are to be discouraged by pulpit, pillory, and penalty. Panic worsens mortality. Trade must continue where possible. No official recognition is to be given to impossible creatures." Tomas read it twice. "Trade must continue," he said softly. "Yes, the villages were dying. Trade must continue. People were seeing something. Trade must continue." The words tasted poisonous. Matthias leaned over the table, lantern light cutting deep hollows under his eyes. "You think corruption always wears the 8-pointed star? You think evil always chants in cellars, raises corpses, or paints itself in blood? Sometimes evil wears a clerk's chain of office and writes, 'No official recognition is to be given.' Sometimes the quill does what the dagger began. He turned a page. Here, a report from a road warden near Hergig. He found a plague cart overturned in a ditch. Driver gone. Corpses dragged into the woods. He followed the marks." Tomas read silently, at first. Matthias's hand struck the table. "Aloud," Tomas obeyed. "Tracks numerous. Not wolf, not man. Narrow clawed feet, some booted. Blood trail to old culvert. Heard squealing beneath earth. I ordered men to hold position. Men refused. One entered culvert with torch. Screamed. Something pulled him inside. We fired crossbows into the dark. Returned at dawn with militia. Culvert empty. Bones found stripped, clean. One skull gnawed open from behind. The apprentice's stomach turned. Continue. Reported to magistrate. Magistrate ordered report amended to wolf predation. I refused. Placed under arrest for spreading alarm. And beneath that, Tomas looked at the bottom of the page. There it was again. The rat mark, this time larger, angrier. The tail cut so deep, it had torn through the parchment. Matthias took the page back. That road warden vanished from custody 3 nights later. His cell was locked. The floor was not. Tomas imagined it before he could stop himself. A stone cell, straw damp with piss. A stubborn man sitting awake because fear would not let him sleep. Then scratching below. A slab shifting, tiny claws, whiskers wet with filth, yellow teeth in the dark. A hand over his mouth before he could shout. Not a human hand. Too many joints. Too much strength. Dragged down into a hole too narrow for shoulders, skin scraping from his arms, nails breaking on stone, boots hammering against the floor until one came loose. He looked down at his own boots. The stones beneath the table seemed suddenly thin. Do they come through floors? He asked. Matthias did not answer immediately. That was answer enough. Instead, the witch hunter reached into the case and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it carefully. A piece of bone lay inside, human jawbone. The front teeth remained. The back half had been sawed or gnawed away. Into the outer curve, someone had carved the rat mark. Found in a mass grave outside Middenheim, Matthias said. Plague pit. Lime had eaten most of the bodies. This survived. Who carved it? A dying man with a knife, or a murderer with a sense of humor. Evidence rarely does us the courtesy of purity. The vault creaked. Tomas stiffened. From somewhere in the shelves came a faint rustle. Matthias's pistol appeared in his hand. Silence. Then a squeak. Small, ordinary. A rat ran along the edge of a lower shelf, fat and brown, whiskers trembling. It paused in the lantern light. Black eyes bright as wet beads. Tomas let out the breath he had been holding. Just a rat. Matthias shot it. The pistol cracked like judgment. The rat burst against the shelf, blood and fur spraying across plague accounts. Its body hit the floor in 2 pieces, twitching. Tomas recoiled. Master! Never say just a rat in a room full of plague dead. It was an animal, perhaps. Matthias crossed to it, drew a dagger, and turned the remains over. Beneath the torn fur, around one hind leg, was a tiny loop of greenish wire. Tomas went cold. Matthias used the dagger tip to lift it. Attached to the wire was a scrap of parchment, no larger than a fingernail, rolled tight. Still just a rat? Tomas had no answer. The witch hunter carried the scrap to the table and pinned it under the lantern base. He did not open it. Messenger? Tomas asked. Marker. Spy. Test. Bait. None are comforting. But here, in a sealed chapter house, especially here. The dead rat's blood dripped from the shelf in slow ticks. Matthias picked up the jawbone again and placed it beside the ledgers. You see the pattern now, Tomas nodded slowly. The official records blame plague, bad air, panic, wolves, fire, starvation. But the margins keep showing rats, upright rats, missing bodies, undermined floors, witnesses silenced, reports amended. Good, Skaven. Matthias said nothing. Tomas forced himself to continue. The Empire knew. The Empire suspected, Matthias said, then denied, then forgot, then suspected again. That cycle has killed more Imperial citizens than 1,000 battles. Why would anyone deny an enemy like that? The witch hunter's eyes were very dark, because an enemy beneath your feet is worse than one beyond your border. A beast man in the woods confirms the value of walls. A Norscan raid confirms the value of soldiers. A vampire confirms the value of priests and stakes. But ratmen under your cities? That means your granaries are vulnerable, your wells are vulnerable, your children are vulnerable, your ledgers are lies, and your rulers have been standing on a battlefield while declaring the war impossible. The lantern guttered. Matthias leaned close to Tomas. Men would rather be doomed by a plague they understand than saved by admitting a horror they mocked. The apprentice looked again at the casualty lists. Names, numbers, margins, rat marks. He thought of laughing in taverns at stories of man-sized vermin. He thought of scholars with clean hands dismissing witnesses who stank of sewers and fear. He thought of magistrates ordering reports amended while bodies vanished through floors. His face burned with shame. Matthias saw that too. Good, he said, that I am ashamed. That shame may yet be turned into attention. He closed the first ledger, but left his palm upon it. The Black Plague did not merely kill men, Tomas. It taught the Empire how eagerly it would blind itself to survive the hour. The Skaven did not need to defeat every army. They needed officials to prefer tidy causes. They needed priests to preach calm while the sellers scratched. They needed merchants to insist the roads remain open. They needed educated men to laugh first and investigate never. Tomas looked toward the dead rat on the floor. And the marks? Some truths survive only in margins, Matthias said. A frightened clerk, a dying priest, a road warden about to be silenced, a mother who saw yellow eyes under the crib but knew the magistrate would call her mad. They could not force the Empire to believe, so they scratched little rats beside the dead. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Tomas reached for his journal. Matthias allowed it. What should I write? The witch hunter looked at the black oak case, the plague ledgers, the burned rat sign, the gnawed jawbone, and the tiny unopened scrap tied to a dead rat's leg. Write this. Denial is not innocence. Silence is not safety. A truth banished from the official line will crawl into the margin, and there it will wait with teeth. Tomas wrote the words carefully. As his pen moved, something faint sounded below the floor. Not tapping this time, scratching. Matthias turned his head. His pistol was already reloaded. Tomas did not laugh. Chapter 2 1111 Imperial Calendar, Matthias Krieger. Made Tomas read until the dead became heavier than the ledger. Not names anymore. Not ink. Not dry figures laid flat by clerks who had learned to keep their hands steady while writing ruin. The dead gathered in the chamber as Tomas spoke them aloud. They stood between the shelves. They crowded the cold stones. They pressed close to the lantern's yellow eye, with black swellings under their jaws and blood dried beneath their noses. The Black Plague did not begin as a scream. That was the first cruelty of it. It began as a cough. A cooper's wife in a village outside Talabheim, a dockhand in Marienburg who spat red into the river and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. A rat-catcher in Nuln found stiff beneath a bridge, his sack of vermin torn open and empty. A child in a coaching inn near the Stir who complained that the room smelled of wet fur though the windows were barred against winter. Small things, dismissible things. The old world was built upon dismissible things. Hunger was ordinary. Fever was ordinary. A corpse in a ditch was unfortunate, not remarkable. Rats were everywhere. Rats in grain bins, rats in walls, rats in cradles, rats in the chapel roof, chewing holes through saints' painted faces. Then the swellings came. Matthias set the next ledger before Tomas. Its cover was warped by damp, the leather blistered as if it had once been boiled. A strip of black cloth was tied around it, knotted 3 times. 1111 I see, Matthias said. The year the Empire began to learn how much a man can lose before he admits he is afraid. Tomas opened the book. The first pages were neat, parish notations, weather, crop yields, a complaint about grain weights. The handwriting belonged to a man who believed tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Then, halfway down a page, the script changed. 3 households sick, 2 dead by morning. Priest requests lime. By the next page, the letters were hurried. By the next, they leaned like men running. Tomas read silently for a moment. Matthias's gloved hand came down on the table. Aloud. Tomas drew a breath. Year 1111, after the spring thaw, village of Dornfeld. First signs, fever, black lumps in groin and armpit, bleeding from gums, vomiting, rats, found dead in well house. Water declared unsafe. Second day, 11 dead. Fourth day, 38 dead. Sixth day, no bell ringer living. The chamber held the words. Matthias nodded. Continue. Gate sealed by order of local reeve. 2 families attempted escape through South Ditch. Shot by militia. Tomas paused. Read. He obeyed. Bodies left in ditch until morning. 1 woman still living when collected. Begged for water. Cart driver refused contact. Woman struck with pole until quiet. Burned with others. Matthias's face did not move. The scratch beneath the floor had ceased, but its absence seemed almost intentional. Tomas kept glancing downward, imagining little claws waiting under stone, patient and clever. Do you feel it yet? Matthias asked. What? The shape of collapse. Tomas looked at the ledger. No army, no siege engines, no banners on the horizon, just a village discovering, 1 household at a time, that help is afraid to enter and mercy is afraid to touch. He turned the next page himself. Matthias led him. The record described a cart, not a grand instrument of tragedy, just a farm cart, reinforced with planks and taken from a dead man's barn. Its wheels had been wrapped in rags to keep them from breaking on frozen ruts. 2 oxen pulled it at first, then 1 ox, then men, then boys, then no one, because the cart stood in the road full of bodies while flies crawled over mouths that would never close. Tomas read the description until his voice roughened. The bodies were stacked no more than 4 high at first, later 6 or 7 when hands became scarce, infants placed in baskets, elderly wrapped in sheets when available, those with no kin collected by hooks. Those too swollen to lift were rolled in blankets or dragged by rope. Several burst during movement. He stopped, despite himself. Matthias's eyes rose. Describe it. It says no. See it. Tomas hated him for that. Then he looked again. A winter road, mud black as old blood. A cart tipped slightly under the weight of the dead. A man in a waxed cloak walking beside it, with a scarf tied over his mouth, 1 eye swollen shut from lack of sleep. Hooks in his hands, iron hooks, the kind used for meat. He reaches into a doorway and catches a corpse beneath the arm. The hook tears through the soft plague-bloated flesh, and dark fluid runs down the dead man's side. The corpse slips, smacks face first onto the threshold, and the swollen belly splits with a wet rip. Gas and filth spill out. The collector turns away, retching into his mask, then goes back because there are 3 more inside, and the bell has not stopped ringing. Tomas swallowed and forced the words out. The record states that some corpses ruptured when dragged, spreading fluids upon floors, thresholds, and collectors. Several collectors died within days. Replacement collectors refused duty. Reeve ordered refusal punished by hanging. Good, Matthias said. Good? You are no longer reading as a clerk. Tomas said nothing. Matthias took a long rolled sheet from the plague case and spread it across the table. It was a route map, drawn in shaky lines. Roads, river crossings, market towns, monasteries, coaching inns. Beside each settlement were marks, circles, crosses, black slashes, and occasionally the small rat-like sign Tomas now despised. The plague traveled better than armies, Matthias said. Armies need supply. Plague makes supply of the supplied. A road carries grain, letters, pilgrims, soldiers, fugitives, merchants, priests, gossip, hope. In 1111, the roads carried death, wearing all those faces. His finger moved along the map. A drover leaves a sick village with 3 cattle and a cough. He sells 1 animal in a town that still has open gates. A cook buys the meat. A serving girl wipes blood from the chopping block with her apron, then carries ale to 6 tables. A carter sleeps in the straw behind the inn. Fleas find him. Rats find the grain sacks. By the time the first body stiffens, the drover is 2 roads away, and the inn has sent bedsheets to be washed in the stream. Tomas watched Matthias's finger travel. Here, a monastery near the upper Talabek. Their brothers took in refugees because compassion demanded it. The abbot ordered the sick laid in the chapel. They ran out of pallets by the 2nd night. By the 5th, the chapel floor was meat. He took another page and handed it over. Tomas read. Brother Othmar records that the groans continued after Compline and prevented sleep. Several sick began bleeding from eyes and ears. 1 novice, assigned to water duty, collapsed into a basin. Water discarded. Basin burned. Unclear if effective. His eyes moved lower. On the 7th day, doors to the chapel were barred from outside. Matthias waited. Tomas continued, more quietly. Those within beat upon the doors until strength failed. Some attempted to claw through the lower panels. At dawn, no voices. At noon, 1 voice. At evening, none. Chapel opened after 3 days. Bodies fused together in places by fluids and heat. Brother Othmar recommends total burning. The image came unbidden. A holy chamber turned foul, saints gazing down from painted walls while the dying slid in one another's blood. A monk at the door, hands pressed to wood while the sick inside begged by name. Brother, let me out. Brother, I confessed. Brother, I am clean. Fingernails snapping as they clawed the panels. A child shrieking for water. Then silence thickening by degrees until the door itself seemed ashamed. And did burning save them? Tomas asked. It saved the stones, Matthias said. Not the men. He leaned back. Remember that distinction. Plague teaches cruel arithmetic. Seal a gate, and those inside die. Open it, and perhaps 10 villages die. Burn a house, and the family inside screams. Spare it, and the street may empty by morning. Men who prefer simple virtue do not last long in plague years. Tomas looked at him. Is that what happened across the empire? No, Matthias said. Worse, it happened unevenly. That, somehow, was colder. In one province, officials acted quickly and murdered too many in the name of containment. In another, they delayed and let entire towns become charnel pits. Some priests died giving rites. Some priests fled with silver candlesticks under their robes. Some physicians bled patients until they hastened death. Some sat beside the dying and held hands no one else dared touch. Courage and cowardice grew in the same streets. He drew a narrow bundle from the case. The paper inside was brittle and browned at the edges. Altdorf correspondence. Chancery copies. Sanitized, of course. The originals likely named more blameworthy men. Tomas took the first sheet. The tone was formal. That made it monstrous. Trade interruption, likely to cause hardship exceeding present mortality estimates. Quarantine to be applied selectively. Avoid public mention of subterranean disturbances. Reports of vermin agitation to be categorized under sanitation. No bell ringing after midnight without approval. Tomas stared at the last line. No bell ringing. Bells frighten people, Matthias said. People were dying. Yes, they silenced the bells. In some towns, not everywhere. Tomas imagined the dead lying unannounced. No toll for the soul. No rhythm by which a neighborhood knew to pray. Only the muffled work of carts in dark streets. Matthias's mouth tightened. Officials fear sound. Sound gathers crowds. Crowds ask questions. Questions become blame. Blame finds doors. And underneath the doors? Tomas asked. Matthias gave him a sharp look. The apprentice held his gaze. A faint approval flickered there and vanished. Beneath many doors, Matthias said. The rats were already inside. The lantern shivered as if a draught had found it. Matthias opened another ledger, this one from a walled town in Stirland. Its pages were marked with fingerprints. Brown, black, rust red. The town of Gebsheim sealed its gates in late autumn of 1111. They believed walls could keep plague out. Perhaps they did for 2 weeks. Then the first child sickened in a house near the tanner's quarter. Rats? Tomas asked. Read. Tomas read the account. The child developed fever. The mother hid it because she feared the pest house. The father bribed a watchman to fetch a physician by night. The physician came, lanced a swelling, wrapped his tools, and visited 3 other houses before dawn. By morning, the mother was coughing blood. By evening, the watchman had collapsed at the north gate. Then, the gate guard, Tomas said. Yes. What did they do? Closed inner districts, posted militia, executed looters, burned bedding, prayed. Did it help? For a time. Matthias turned the page. The handwriting changed again. Militia ordered to remove bodies from tanner's quarter. Resistance from residents. 2 men hanged for concealing dead kin. 1 woman attacked collector with cleaver. Collector's left hand severed. Woman beaten by guard and burned with household. Tomas winced. Plague does not make men gentle, Matthias said. Fear takes off the skin and shows what twitches underneath. He tapped the next passage. Here, Tomas read. Corpse cart overturned at dusk near Tanner's Lane. Not accident. Axle cut. Bodies missing by morning. Blood trail into drainage channel. 3 guards entered channel with lanterns and spears. 1 returned. His pulse quickened. Return guard reports voices in dark scratching, laughter like knives on plates. Claims he saw small figures dragging bodies. Guard confined for delirium. And below, Tomas found a margin. The rat mark had been drawn in brown ink. No, not ink. Blood. The little upright figure grinned from the edge of the page. What happened to the guard? Matthias turned the page. Found dead, in confinement. Throat cut, cell locked, no blade recovered, feet gnawed. Tomas looked again at the city account. The plague was no longer merely sickness. It had hands behind it, intelligence, timing. The corpse cart axle cut, bodies removed, witness isolated, witness silenced, official explanation maintained. The horror was not that the Empire had suffered. The horror was that something had worked within the suffering. Matthias seemed to read the thought from his face. Clan Pestilens, he said. The name was quiet and foul. Tomas repeated it. Clan Pestilens. Do not dress the word with drama. They are plague makers, priests of filth, engineers of infection, fanatics who worship corruption as sacrament. The Black Plague was not simply found by them. It was made, cultivated, improved, released. Tomas's stomach twisted. Made. Diseases breed. Rats carry. Fleas carry. Filth carries. But this plague bore signs of intention, patterns, outbreaks near trade arteries, sewer clusters before surface symptoms, corpse theft, suppression of witnesses, contaminated grain stores left where refugees would seize them, wells fouled ahead of retreating populations. That is not bad air. He placed a stained cloth on the table. It had once been white. Now it was spotted with black and gray, stiff in places. A plague mask liner from a physician outside Wurtbad, preserved in vinegar and sealed after death. He wrote notes until the fever took his eyes. Tomas looked at it with disgust. Matthias unfolded the accompanying page. His last record. Read. The handwriting was almost illegible, the letters wandering as if the writer's hand had forgotten obedience. Tomas read slowly. Not natural. Not natural. Found fleas in sealed jar after boiling. Still moving. Rat bodies split open. Green foam. Heard bells underground, though chapel silent. Patient spoke before death, in voice, not hers. Said, the small masters bless the swelling. I have cut 7 buboes. Black pus. Foul beyond description. One contained. Tomas stopped. Continue. One contained a tooth. The chamber seemed to tilt. A human tooth? Tomas asked. Does not specify. His eyes returned to the page. Assistant fled. I envy him. My hands shake. There is scratching in the walls. If this is plague, it has a priest. Tomas lowered the page. Matthias's expression was grim. A useful line. If this is plague, it has a priest. Yes. The witch hunter gathered the documents into piles. Parish records, road reports, town ledgers, chancery letters, medical notes, suppressed testimonies. Around them the story of 1,111 IC spread, not like a single tale, but like infection itself. Many points. Many symptoms, one disease. Tomas closed his eyes for a moment. He saw abandoned villages under grey rain, doors marked with tar, dogs eating their masters because no one had fed them, wells choked with stones, fields unharvested, grain blackening on the stalk, a woman walking down an empty lane carrying a baby that had been dead for 2 days because grief had rotted her reason before plague took her lungs. Soldiers at a gate, with crossbows aimed at their own people. A man trying to climb a wall while his neighbors pulled at his boots, not to stop him, but to climb over him. A corpse cart stuck in mud, the driver cutting away the harness from a dead horse, and pushing until his shoulders tore while bodies slumped and rolled behind him. Then beneath it all, under cellars, under sewers, under granaries, under plague pits, yellow eyes moved. Matthias spoke into that vision. Imperial confidence collapsed slowly. That was its own suffering. At first, nobles promised containment, priests promised intercession, physicians promised remedies, merchants promised supply, magistrates promised order. Then promises died faster than peasants. He picked up a page bearing a noble seal. Here is a baron ordering all refugees turned away. Another page. Here is the same baron begging entry to a city 3 weeks later. Another. Here is the city denying him. Another. Here is his household found dead beside the road. Tomas opened his eyes. Did anyone know what to do? Some knew pieces. Burn bedding, kill rats, seal districts, boil water, avoid bodies, keep ledgers, watch drains. Listen to witnesses no matter how mad they sound. And the Skaven? Strike where men are weakest, spread disease, steal food, undermine walls, murder witnesses. Let panic do the heavy lifting. The scratch below the floor came again. This time Tomas did not flinch. Matthias noticed a slow scrape, then nothing. The witch hunter drew his pistol, but kept it lowered. The records of 1,111 are not heroic, he said. That is why they matter. There is no single battle here, no king raising a sword, no shining hammer descending, just thousands of ordinary failures and a few ordinary mercies. A woman who fed orphans until she died among them. A watch captain who refused to abandon a gate and was found upright against it, dead on his feet. A grave digger who carved names onto boards because he could not bear lime pits without memory. A priest who gave last rites through a closed door so the dying could hear him, even if he could not touch them. Tomas looked down at the ledger, and the empire survived. Not because it deserved to, because enough people did necessary things while others lied. The words settled. Matthias opened one final book. The pages inside were almost blank. Almost. At the top of the first page, in a cramped hand, someone had written, "When the bells stop, count the rats." Below that, scratched deep enough to tear through 3 sheets, was the upright rat mark. Matthias turned the book toward Tomas. This was found in an abandoned counting house in Nuln. No bodies, no blood, only this. The floor had collapsed into a tunnel network beneath the building. The city filled it with rubble, then built over it. Did they search it first? Matthias closed the book. They built over it. Tomas understood. The empire did not always defeat horror. Sometimes it buried the entrance and renamed the street. Matthias began returning the ledgers to the black oak case. Each one disappeared with a soft thud, a dead year going back into its coffin. "What should I write?" Tomas asked. The witch hunter slid the last ledger into place. "Write this. In 1111 I see. The empire learned that plague is not only sickness. It is hunger given wings. fear given law, commerce turned carrion, and denial sharpened into policy. The dead were counted in public. The truth survived in scratches. Tomas wrote. His hand no longer trembled from disgust alone. There was anger in it now. Shame, yes, but anger too. At the clerks, at the magistrates, at the creatures below, at himself for ever having laughed. Matthias locked the case, but did not lift it. Another line, he said. Tomas waited. When death comes from below, look first to the margins. He wrote that too. The scratching did not return. That was no comfort. In the old world, Tomas was beginning to learn. Silence was never proof of absence, only proof that something wished to remain unheard. Chapter 3. Mandred and the Enemy. Below Matthias, Krieger did not begin with Mandred. That surprised Tomas Reikert. After the ledgers of 1111 IC, after the corpse carts and sealed gates, after the parish lists that had taught him to hear plague in the scrape of a pen, Tomas expected a hero. He wanted one, though he would not have admitted it. He wanted a banner raised above the stink, a sword drawn against the vermin dark, a name that could be written after all those other names and make the ink feel less like ash. Matthias gave him another death list. It was thinner than the others, bound not in leather, but in stiffened cloth gone brown with age. The title had been written in a clerk's neat hand, and then crossed through so viciously that the pen had torn the page. Muster of survivors fit for alms, northern provinces, after the Great Plague. Beneath that, added later, revised. Beneath that, scratched in yet another hand, revised, by men who were not there. Tomas looked up. Matthias's eyes were on the page, not on him. Read the first column. Tomas obeyed. Village of Krudenwald. Men fit to march, 12. Boys tall enough to carry spears, 9. Veterans recovered from fever, 3. Horses, none. Oxen, 2, both lame. Bows, 6. Arrows, insufficient. Powder, none. The next, Eisental, men fit to march, 8. Boys, 4. 1 priest, 1 smith with 1 hand, spears, 11. Axes, common. Shields, broken or improvised. Food stores, estimated 5 days. The next, Wolfrath's Ford, men fit to march, none. Boys, none. Women volunteering for militia, 17. Old men volunteering, 6. Fit horses, 1. Note, all male fighting age dead, missing, or fled. Matthias nodded once. That is the army from which legends are made. Tomas looked at the thin pages. This is after the plague, after the first great dying, not after the danger. The Skaven were still attacking. Matthias's mouth tightened. The rat does not leave because the pantry is empty. It chews the walls and looks for another room. He turned away from the table and crossed to one of the locked wall cabinets. This one bore no plague seal. Its door was marked with a painted white wolf's head, a crown, and 3 deep claw gouges that had been left unrepaired. Matthias unlocked it with a key that hung behind his silver hammer icon, then withdrew a bundle wrapped in wolf fur. The fur had gone stiff. He laid it on the table and unfolded it. Inside lay a broken sword, not an ancient relic of perfect craftsmanship, not a ceremonial blade fit for temple processions. It was a working weapon, broad and notched, its edge chewed by use. The blade had snapped a hand's length above the guard. Dried black matter clung in the fuller. Recovered near the Middenland underways, Matthias said, attributed by tradition to one of Mandred's household guard. Perhaps true, perhaps not. The important part is the damage. He handed Tomas a magnifying lens. Tomas bent close. The notches along the sword were uneven. Some came from blades, some from armor, but others were crescent-shaped, deep and ragged. Teeth, he said. Good. Large teeth. Yes. Tomas swallowed. Matthias set a second object beside the sword, a strip of metal, curved and rusted, pierced with 3 crude rivet holes. It had once been part of a helmet or mask. Scratched into it was the same upright rat mark, but this time the mark was not warning. It was decoration, ownership, Skaven armor, Tomas said. Scrap only, taken from a burned tunnel after Mandred's counterattacks, if the archive label is to be trusted. The dwarf note attached to it says the metal is poor, the workmanship hasty, and the intent hateful. Tomas touched the edge with one gloved finger. It was sharp enough to cut. The Empire resisted, he said. The Empire had to remember how. The Witch Hunter moved the lantern closer. Its flame flashed across the broken sword, the rat-marked metal, the survivor muster, and the plague ledgers still waiting inside the black oak case. Mandred, Matthias said at last, came after the Empire had been hollowed. That is why his name matters. Not because he was the first man to swing steel at ratmen. He was not. Not because he alone believed. He did not. His importance lies in what he forced the Empire to admit long enough to survive. Mandred Skavenslayer, Tomas said, a title earned in filth. Matthias drew out a folded campaign testimony. The parchment had been copied several times, each copy bearing corrections. At the top was a name, Hrothgar Meese, Militia Sergeant, Middenland. Beneath it, dictated after amputation. Tomas's eyes paused on that. Read. He read. We were 32 when we entered the drain beneath the North Granary. Lord Mandred's men said the passage had been widened from below. I did not believe it. I had seen plague. I had seen hunger. I had seen men eat boiled leather and babies buried in flour sacks. I thought ratmen were fever talk. Tomas's voice tightened. Matthias watched him without mercy. We went in with lanterns, spears, and hooks. The air was hot and wet. The bricks sweated. Rats ran along the walls in hundreds, but none came near us. That should have warned us. Natural rats do not understand command. The vault seemed to darken. At the first junction, we found bones, not buried, sorted. Long bones stacked one way, skulls another. Children's bones in a separate heap, teeth removed. Tomas glanced at the scrap of Skaven armor. He continued. Bauer vomited into his scarf. Captain struck him for noise. Then something answered the sound from deeper in the drain. It laughed. Matthias's face was still. Tomas read on. The first attack came from above. He felt the words like a hand on the back of his neck. The brick ceiling broke open, and 3 of them dropped among us. Not beasts, not men. Something between, foul and quick. Long muzzles, yellow teeth, rusted blades, cloaks made from stitched hides. One landed on Paul and drove a dagger through his ear into his brain. Paul did not even shout. He folded like laundry. Another opened Captain Krieger from behind, knife in under the ribs, up and out, so his guts fell against the floor before he knew he had been killed. The third bit through Bauer's cheek and tore away half his face. Tomas stopped only long enough to breathe. "Continue," Matthias said. "We stabbed them. They died hard. One took 3 spearheads through the belly and still crawled along the shaft to bite Kessel's fingers off. I crushed its head against the wall with my shield until the bricks showed through its skull. Its blood was black and stank of privies and copper. Tomas tasted metal in his own mouth. They came then from the side tunnels, too many to count. We tried to form a line, but there was no room. Spears caught on brick, shields jammed. Men screamed names in the dark. Their blades were small and hooked, made for hamstrings, throats, bellies. They did not fight like orcs. They did not batter. They swarmed. They cut low and vanished. They stabbed from holes no wider than a dog kennel. They dragged wounded men by the ankles and took them screaming behind the walls. The apprentice looked up. Lord Mandred was there. Matthias tapped the page. "Read." Tomas found the line. Then the Lord came down. The handwriting changed slightly, perhaps where the original speaker had paused. He should not have fit in that train with armor on, but he came anyway, bent under the ceiling, white wolf on his helm blackened by muck. He carried an axe and a sword. I remember that because the axe was already red to the haft. He did not ask how many. He did not ask whether we could hold. He stepped over Captain Krieger's guts, seized a lantern from the floor, and threw it into the largest side tunnel. Tomas leaned closer. Oil broke. Flame went in. The dark screamed. Matthias's eyes were coldly bright. "Now you begin to see him." Tomas read faster. By the firelight, we saw their numbers. They filled the tunnel like maggots in meat. Some wore rags, some mail, some had bells and censers, swinging smoke that made men cough blood. One had a staff topped with 3 skulls of children. Lord Mandred charged them. The next lines were smeared. He hit the first with his shield and drove it backward into the fire. Its fur went up. It shrieked and clawed at his arm. He smashed its face with the pommel until the snout folded sideways. Another leapt for his throat. He caught it by the neck and crushed it against the ceiling so hard its spine came through its back. Then he cut down into the press, sword in one hand, axe in the other, chopping like a butcher in winter. Tomas could see it. Not a polished hero on a battlefield, but a noble lord hunched in a sewer, boots slipping in shit and blood, breath loud inside his helm, killing by lantern flare while plague smoke gnawed at his lungs. Ratmen surging out of the brick dark, men trying to rally because he had gone first, and shame dragged them after courage. We followed, Tomas read, not because we were brave, because he made cowardice feel smaller than the tunnel. Matthias gave the faintest nod. That line is why I kept the testimony. The account became a butcher's ledger. Mandred cleaving a Skaven from shoulder to ribs, the axe lodging so deep he had to kick the corpse free. A militia boy driving a spear through a ratman's mouth and losing both eyes when another came over his back. A plague censer swinging through the press, its green smoke blistering human skin. The man who breathed deepest tearing his own throat open with his nails as boils rose across his tongue. Mandred taking the censer-bearer's arm off at the elbow, then stamping the severed limb into the sludge so it could not keep swinging. There were no banners in the drain, no horns, only screaming in close stone. A ratman with a barbed spear pinned one of Mandred's guards through the thigh and twisted until the leg opened like split pork. The guard fell, and 3 smaller Skaven leapt onto him, knives rising and falling so quickly their arms blurred. Mandred waded in, took a blade through the gap under his breastplate, and answered by smashing his axe into the nearest skull. The head burst against the wall, teeth and brains spattering across the brick. He shouldered another aside, hooked his sword under the third creature's jaw, and ripped upward. The snout came off. The thing staggered, paws over the hole where its face had been, then drowned, standing in its own blood. Tomas read until his voice became hoarse. At last they broke. Not from fear of death, I think, but from fear of losing more than they had planned. They dragged their wounded with hooks. They took our dead where they could. Lord Mandred ordered pursuit. We begged him not to. He went anyway. The next passage had been written in a different hand. Sergeant Mice lost his left arm beyond the 3rd junction. Amputation performed by saw after extraction. Patient remained lucid. Insisted the enemy was organized, numerous, and capable of speech. Tomas lowered the page. Capable of speech? Yes, Matthias said. What did they say? Nothing worth repeating, unless necessary. Master, the witch hunter, considered him. Then he reached into the bundle and removed a sliver of slate. On it, scratched phonetically in Rakespiel, were fragments of Skaven chatter recorded by some survivor with a better ear than nerves. Man things die. Spread the gift. Below is ours. No tell, no see, no believe. Tomas read the last words twice. No believe. His skin prickled. They knew, he said. Of course they knew. That we denied them, that we helped them. Matthias rapped the slate again. Mandred's war was not only against an enemy below, it was against human disbelief above. Imagine trying to rally a plague-bled empire against a foe. Half the nobles considered superstition, half the clerks preferred unnamed, and half the priests feared to mention, lest panic finish what disease began. That is too many halves, Tomas said softly. Fear has poor arithmetic. Matthias returned to the cabinet and removed a larger document, sealed with white wax and marked by claw cuts. Mandred's proclamations survive mostly through later copies. This one was confiscated from a noble family that kept it hidden behind a false wall. Their ancestor had refused to answer the summons. He opened it. The script was bold, almost angry. By order of Mandred, protector of the north and sworn enemy of the vermin below, every able body is to be counted, armed, and set to watch the drains, granaries, wells, and cellar mouths. Any official who suppresses witness of the ratkin shall be treated as accomplice to murder. Any village reporting signs below ground shall be aided, not mocked. Burn the dead with prayer. Burn the tunnels with oil. Seal nothing until it has been searched. Tomas felt something in his chest loosen. He understood. He understood enough. Was that rare? In rulers? Matthias asked. Yes. The old witch hunter's voice carried no amusement. Mandred was not a saint. Do not make one of him. Saints are useful in chapels and dangerous in histories. He was ambitious, brutal, suspicious, and capable of cruelty. But he believed witnesses. That one virtue saved lives. Tomas looked at the proclamation again. Any official who suppresses witness of the ratkin shall be treated as accomplice to murder. He thought of the magistrates who amended reports, the clerks who crossed out impossible things. The professor gnawed beneath his study, the road warden dragged through the cell floor. Did he punish them? Some. Matthias drew another account forward. A trial record from Middenland. A grain factor accused of selling contaminated stores while concealing tunnel signs beneath his warehouses. He insisted the scratching was ordinary vermin. Mandred's men opened the floor. Tomas read the next lines himself. The cellar contained 13 bodies. 2 were recent, 11 older. All showed gnawing. Beneath the north wall, a tunnel descended beyond torch reach. Grain sacks had been deliberately slit and fouled. Sentence: hanging insufficient due to scale of crime. Factor to be broken, displayed, and burned after death. Tomas's jaw tightened. Graphic enough for policy, Matthias said. What happened? The sentence was carried out. The witch hunter did not wait for Tomas to ask. They tied him to a wheel in the market square. Read the charges aloud while people threw stones, rotten vegetables, and once I am told a dead rat. Then the executioner took an iron bar and began with the shins. A proper breaking is not quick. The bone must snap, but the man must remain alive enough to understand why the crowd has come. Tomas imagined the crack, the first scream, the crowd flinching, then leaning in, the factor's legs bending in places legs were not made to bend, the bar rising and falling, shins, knees, thighs, forearms next, so the hands curled like dead spiders, ribs last, each strike punching breath and blood from his mouth. A man who had counted coins over tainted grain reduced to a sack of pain beneath the accusation he had tried to bury. Cruel, Tomas said. Yes. Necessary. Matthias's eyes did not soften. Ask the 13 bodies in his cellar. Tomas had no answer. The witch hunter let the silence stand. Then he continued. Mandred's forces drove into tunnels wherever they could. Not grand underkingdoms, not the deep empire of vermin rumor, but access ways, nests, plague stores, corpse pits, siege burrows, hidden routes beneath granaries and wells. Some were empty by the time men entered, some were traps, some were slaughterhouses, waiting to learn which way the slaughter would run. He placed one more testimony on the table. This one bore a dark thumbprint. Battle beneath the old charnel field near Middenheim, Tomas read. The entrance was found beneath graves of plague dead. We burned incense at the threshold. It did not improve the smell. Lord Mandred ordered shields front, lanterns high, hooks ready. The first chamber contained bones arranged in circles. The second contained cages. Some prisoners still lived. They had no eyes. The words blurred for a heartbeat. Tomas forced them clear. One man begged us to kill him before cutting the lock. He said if we opened the cage, they would know. We opened it. They knew. The battle that followed was written in fragments, as if the recorder had been interrupted by memory. Ratmen pouring from vertical shafts. Militia slipping on corpse grease. A soldier's torch knocked into a pile of plague rags. Green smoke curling up. and making men vomit through their helmets. A Skaven with twin knives climbing a shield wall, stabbing through eye slits until one blade snapped in a skull. Mandred ordering oil thrown behind them to prevent retreat and force the line forward. That line made Tomas stop. He burned their retreat. He removed the option of panic. That could have killed his own men. It likely did. Tomas stared. Matthias's face remained implacable. You wanted heroes. Here they are. The apprentice looked back down. The text described Mandred in the press. His armor scored, one ear torn nearly off, face streaked in blood, still advancing. A rat ogre appeared then, not a mere ratman, but a hulking abomination stitched with muscle, iron plates nailed into flesh, one arm ending in claws, the other in a rusted hook. It smashed through the front rank like a falling wall. One man vanished beneath its fist, from the chest up. Another was lifted by the hook through the belly, kicking, screaming, trying to hold his intestines in as the beast shook him loose and flung him into the ceiling. A shieldman was bitten in half at the waist, his legs standing a moment after the upper body had gone. Mandred met it. Not alone, not like a bard's lie, but first he ducked under the hook and drove his sword into the thing's thigh. The blade stuck. The rat ogre roared, a wet furnace sound, and backhanded him into the wall. Stone cracked. Mandred fell. His guard surged to cover him, and 3 died in as many breaths, crushed, hooked, torn. Mandred rose with no sword, took an axe from a dead man's hand, and charged again. He hacked at the same wound. Once, twice. A third blow chopped deep enough to sever tendons. The creature staggered. A spearman thrust into its mouth. The spear snapped. The rat ogre bit down and took the man's arm to the elbow. Mandred climbed the beast's front like a murderer, scaling a gallows, hooked one hand into an iron plate nailed through its flesh, and drove the axe into its neck. The first blow lodged. The second opened it. The third sent black blood spraying over both of them in a sheet. The rat ogre thrashed, slammed him sideways, tore flesh from his shoulder with its claws. Mandred held on. He wrenched the axe free and buried it again behind the skull. The monster collapsed forward, crushing the dead and nearly crushing him beneath it. When they pulled him out, the testimony said, he spat blood and ordered the tunnels burned deeper. Tomas stopped reading. His breath had grown shallow. Now, Matthias said, tell me what the Empire remembered. Mandred Skavenslayer. And what did it forget? Tomas looked at the ledgers. The Skaven. Again. It remembered the hero and forgot the enemy. Matthias nodded. That is the rot in the lesson. Men like heroes, because heroes make danger feel concluded. Put a title after Mandred's name, carve a wolf on his tomb, sing of the vermin slain, and the mind relaxes. It says, there. It was faced. It was ended. But it was not. No. The witch hunter leaned close. Mandred's victory bought time. Blood bought time. Burned tunnels bought time. Broken officials bought time. But the enemy below did not cease to exist, because men above grew tired of being afraid. Tomas's gaze dropped to the rat-marked armor scrap. How could they forget after all this? How does a man forget the stink of a battlefield? He washes, he drinks, he tells the story often enough that the worst parts become useful and the useless parts fall away. A generation later, the drains are repaired. The graves grow grass. The ledgers are sealed. Children laugh at tales of ratmen because laughter is easier inheritance than vigilance. The witch hunter began rapping the broken sword again. Mandred associated the Empire's survival with belief. That was his greatness. But after him, belief became memory. Memory became legend. Legend became embarrassment. Embarrassment became silence. He returned the relics to the cabinet. Tomas did not want them put away. That surprised him. The sword, the armor scrap, the testimony of Sergeant Mice, they were ugly things, but while they lay on the table, the truth had weight. Once locked away, it would become deniable again. Matthias seemed to know. That is why we open cases, he said. Not to worship relics, to make lies uncomfortable. The floor scratched once beneath them. Both men looked down. This time the sound moved. A line of faint scraping traveled from beneath the plague case toward the far wall, quick and light. Then another, then three together. Matthias raised his pistol. Tomas reached for the loaded weapon Matthias had given him earlier and found, with a cold flash of gratitude, that it was still at his belt. The scratching stopped at the wall beneath the cabinet, marked with the wolf's head. A tiny piece of mortar fell. Then a voice whispered from behind the stones. Man-thing remembers. It was thin, high, wet with malice. Matthias fired. The shot punched into the wall. Stone chips burst outward. Something squealed behind the masonry, shrill and furious. Tomas drew and fired after him, the recoil slamming up his arm. His shot struck lower. More stone shattered. A black claw burst through the hole, scrabbling, broken fingers twitching. Matthias crossed the room in 3 strides and pinned the claw to the wall with his sword. The thing behind the stones screamed. Not like an animal, like a spiteful little man being denied a secret. Listen, Matthias, he said at Tomas. The creature chattered in its pain. No see, no say, no tell, no believe. Matthias twisted the blade. The claw spasmed. No believe, no believe! Then the witch hunter drew a flask from his coat and poured oil into the crack. He struck a spark. Fire ran into the wall. The scream became a shriek, then a bubbling cough, then a wet collapse somewhere behind the stones. Smoke seeped through the cracks, carrying the stink of burned fur, sewer fat, and cooked meat. Tomas stood with a smoking pistol in his hand, heart pounding so hard his ribs hurt. Matthias pulled his sword free. The severed claw remained pinned to the floor where it had fallen, fingers curling and uncurling. Mandred fought the enemy below, Matthias said, as calmly as if continuing a sermon. We fight the same enemy's best ally, Tomas swallowed. Disbelief. Yes, the witch hunter stamped on the twitching claw until the bones cracked. Then he looked at Tomas. Write the lesson. Tomas opened his journal with hands that no longer shook from fear alone. Matthias spoke, while smoke coiled above the broken wall. Mandred Skavenslayer mattered not because he made the Empire safe, but because he made the Empire look downward. He believed the witnesses, armed the survivors, punished the silencers, and carried war into the tunnels. But memory is a poor sentry, and legend is a locked gate with rusted hinges. Tomas wrote every word. And one more line, Matthias said. The apprentice waited, pen poised. The enemy below is patient. It can survive defeat. It can survive fire. It can survive heroes. What it cannot survive for long is being seen clearly. From behind the wall came one last faint squeal, then silence. This time Tomas did not mistake it for peace. Chapter 4. The Lesson of Denial. Matthias Krieger kept the severed claw. That troubled Tomas Reikert more than the thing itself. The ratmen behind the wall had burned badly. The stink of it still hung in the vault. Scorched fur, boiled sewer fat, singed meat, and the bitter chemical reek of whatever filth it had smeared on its blade or teeth. Smoke curled in thin threads from the cracked masonry beneath the cabinet, marked with the white wolf. Bits of blackened mortar lay scattered across the floor. A smear of blood, too dark to be human, ran down the stone in a trembling line. The claw had stopped twitching after Matthias crushed the bones beneath his heel, but the witch hunter had not thrown it away. He had wrapped it in oiled cloth, tied it with cord, marked the bundle with a sigil of warning, and placed it beside Tomas's journal. "Evidence," he said. Tomas stared at the bundle. "Against whom?" Matthias looked at him from under the shadow of his broad-brimmed hat. "Against tomorrow's fool." The plague case remained open on the iron table. The ledgers lay inside like corpses returned to a mass grave. Around them were the relics of a war the Empire preferred to remember badly. The broken sword attributed to Mandred's guard, the scrap of rat-marked armor, the survivor muster, the plague physician's last note, the jawbone carved with the upright rat, and the proclamation that had ordered men to search the tunnels before sealing them. Tomas understood each object more than he wanted to. He understood that the Empire had survived the Black Plague. He understood that Mandred Skavenslayer had forced men to look below. He understood that the Skaven were real. But understanding was not the same as enduring the lesson. The chamber had not become safer after the ratman died. It had become more honest. Matthias closed the cabinet door and set a fresh warding seal over the crack in the wall. The paper browned at the edges as soon as it touched the stone. Something inside the wall hissed once, like spit on a hot iron, then fell silent. "More of them?" Tomas asked. "Always." The answer was not dramatic. That made it worse. How many lies can a city stand upon before the street collapses? Tomas said nothing. Matthias returned to the table and lifted the plague physician's note. "If this is plague, it has a priest." The line had lodged in Tomas like a splinter. A disease with intention, a sickness with hands, not a cloud of bad air, not the wrath of weather, not the random cruelty of crowded streets and dirty water. Something made, carried, hidden, released. Protected by disbelief, Matthias placed the note in front of him. "Read it again," Tomas did. His voice sounded older than it had when they began. "If this is plague, it has a priest. Now, read the margin." Tomas looked to the side of the page. There, very small, nearly lost beneath a smear of brown, someone had written, "I told them." They laughed. The words were worse than the rat mark. Tomas felt his jaw clench. Who wrote that? The assistant, perhaps, or the physician before fever blurred his hand, or the man who found the body. It does not matter. The sentence is the grave marker of thousands. Matthias drew another document from the case. This one had been folded many times and sealed under a strip of blackened wax. The parchment was thin, the writing cramped, as if the author had tried to fit terror into a space small enough to hide. Confession of Deputy Magistrate Wilhelm Cross, Matthias said. Recorded in 1120 IC, 5 years after the worst of the plague, he confessed not to heresy, not to sorcery, not to murder by his own hand. What then? To amendment. Tomas frowned. Matthias opened the confession. He changed reports. The witch hunter slid the page across the table. Tomas began to read. I, Wilhelm Cross, Deputy Magistrate of Bruckerhof, do admit before Sigmar and lawful witness that during the plague years I ordered the removal, alteration, and destruction of claims regarding man-sized vermin, subterranean voices, tunnels beneath dwellings, missing bodies, and armed creatures observed near plague pits. Tomas stopped. Matthias said nothing. The apprentice continued. I did this under instruction from superiors, and from fear that public acknowledgement would cause riot, flight, loss of trade, and collapse of confidence in authority. His voice hardened. I told myself that impossible things could not be true. I told others the same. When witnesses persisted, I ordered 3 whipped, 2 confined, 1 expelled from town, and 1 placed in the stocks during winter. The last died. Matthias's eyes were flat and black. Continue. After the plague passed, I reviewed the altered reports and found that in every district where such claims had been suppressed, missing persons exceeded recorded dead by no less than 1 household in 6. Tomas's fingers tightened around the page. 1 household in 6, he whispered. Read the last line. Tomas lowered his eyes. I did not kill them, but I made it easier for their killers to return unseen. The silence afterward felt thick enough to choke on. Matthias let the confession remain between them. There, he said. The lesson of denial. Tomas looked up. He knew. Eventually. Too late. Most men discover courage after the bill has been paid by others. The words were cruel, but Tomas could not deny them. He imagined Cross at a desk, candle burning low, complaints stacked beside him. A woman crying about yellow eyes in her cellar. A road warden swearing the floor had opened. A priest insisting the bodies were being stolen. Cross rubbing his temples, thinking of riots, trade, superiors, reputation, order, taking up his pen, crossing out the impossible, replacing it with wolves, fever, panic, delirium, filth, ink as burial earth. Was he punished? Tomas asked. Yes. How? Matthias folded his hands over the head of his cane. He was made to read every altered report aloud in the town square. The names of the witnesses, the punishments he ordered, the households later lost, the missing children, the sealed cellars, the pits reopened and found empty. It took him 6 hours. By the end his voice had failed, so the provost gave him water and made him continue. And then? Hanged. Tomas looked at the confession. That seems light. It was not the hanging that punished him. Matthias's expression did not change. The families of the missing stood before him while he read. One old woman brought the shoe of a child no one had believed existed because Cross had amended the household count. She held it up the entire time. He could not look away. When they placed the rope around his neck, he begged to be burned instead. Why? Because fire ends in ash. A rope gives a man time to feel weight. Tomas could see it too clearly. The platform slick with rain, The crowd silent, not with mercy, but with hunger for acknowledgement. Cross standing with the confession and shaking hands, lips cracked, voice rasping names back into the world. The old woman holding the child's shoe like a holy relic of accusation. Then, the rope, the drop, not clean. A short fall, feet kicking, hands tied behind him, face swelling purple as the crowd watched him learn, by inches, how slowly truth could tighten. Matthias took back the confession. "Do you pity him?" Tomas considered lying. "Yes," he said. "Good." That surprised him. Matthias tucked the confession away. Pity him, then judge him. Pity without judgment is weakness. Judgment without pity is vanity. We are servants of Sigmar, not butchers who enjoy the sound. A scraping came from the far side of the vault. Tomas turned, pistol half drawn. Nothing moved. Only one of the plague ledgers had shifted in the open case. Its cover lifted slightly, as if a breath had passed beneath it. Matthias raised one finger. Wait. The cover opened another inch. From between the pages, something thin and gray pushed out. A rat's tail, dead, hairless, stiff as wire. Then another. Then a narrow skull forced itself from the ledger's spine, parchment fibers tearing around it like flesh opening around a birth. It was not a living rat, not a whole corpse either. It was made from scraps, bone, dried skin, black thread, and paper folded into ribs. Its eyes were two pinpricks of green mold light, a plague record vermin, a thing made from testimony suppressed too long. It dragged itself onto the table with a sound like old pages being chewed. Tomas fired. The shot tore through the creature and blasted apart 3 ledgers behind it. Paper fragments whirled into the air. The rat thing burst into scraps, but each scrap twitched where it landed. Little paper bones unfolded, inked claws scratched at the iron table. Matthias swore under his breath, not in fear, in irritation. Bad shot. It was on the table. It was evidence. It was moving. Yes, the scraps skittered toward the edge, gathering themselves, trying to become many smaller things instead of one larger thing. Matthias seized the lantern, opened its hood, and swept flame across the table. The paper creatures curled, blackened, and squealed in tiny voices. Not rat voices. Human voices. I told them. They laughed. I told them. They laughed. Tomas felt the words crawl under his skin. One burning scrap leapt from the table and landed on his sleeve. It clung there, folding itself around his wrist like a biting insect. Heat stabbed through the cloth. He slapped at it, but it dug in with ink-black claws. Matthias grabbed his arm, pinned it to the table, and pressed a prayer seal onto the scrap. The thing shrieked and burned white. The smell was foul. Scorched paper, singed wool, and the stink of old fear. Tomas ripped his sleeve back. Beneath it, the skin was reddened in the shape of 3 tiny claw marks. Matthias inspected it. Not deep. That was from a ledger. From denial, preserved in a ledger. The witch hunter turned back to the plague case. The remaining books trembled faintly. He drew his sword. Stand back! Tomas obeyed. Matthias took the first trembling ledger and pinned it to the table with a sword point. The cover bucked. Pages fluttered. A sound came from inside it, muffled but frantic, like rats trapped in a wall. Then the book began to speak. Not in one voice. In dozens! They were fevered. Peasant nonsense. No official recognition. Trade must continue. Wolves, bad air, panic-mongering. Impossible creatures. Impossible. 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 With each repetition, the ledger swelled. Pages bulging outward. Stitching, snapping. A muzzle formed from folded parchment. Whiskers of black thread twitched from its spine. Tomas felt horror turn into anger. He stepped forward before Matthias could stop him, drew the fire iron from beside the brazier, and brought it down with both hands. The blow smashed the forming skull flat. The ledger screamed. Tomas hit it again. The iron bar crushed parchment, cracked the wooden cover, drove the sword point deeper into the table. Ink sprayed across his face like black blood. He struck a third time, teeth clenched, shoulders burning, and the thing split open. Inside were not pages, but compacted names, thousands of them, written over one another until they formed a dark pulp. Tiny jaws snapped from the mess. Matthias poured oil over it. Tomas struck flint. Fire bloomed. The ledger burned with a low moan. Names appeared in the flame, rising and vanishing too fast to read. The rat shape collapsed inward, curling into ash around Matthias's sword. For a moment, Tomas thought he heard weeping. Then the vault was still. Matthias looked at him. You are angry? Yes. At the ratmen? Yes. At the officials? Yes. At yourself? Tomas wiped black ink from his cheek. Yes. Good. The witch hunter pulled his sword free from the ash. Anger is useful if chained. Unchained, it is merely another animal looking for a throat. Tomas breathed hard. His hands hurt from gripping the fire iron. I laughed at them, he said. At whom? The witnesses. Not directly, but I would have. A week ago, if some road warden told me ratmen dragged his comrade into a culvert, I would have thought him drunk, fevered, or simple. Yes, you knew that. Yes. That is why you made me read the lists. Matthias's face remained severe. A man may argue with doctrine. He may debate evidence. He may flatter himself with clever doubt. It is harder to laugh while speaking the names of the dead. Tomas looked at the plague case. The laughter was gone from him now. Not buried, burned. What do the Skaven want from denial? He asked. Space, Matthias said. Time, soft ground beneath hard walls, unwatched cellars, unsearched tunnels, mocked witnesses, amended reports, scholars who demand a specimen while the specimen digs beneath their bed. He stepped closer. The Skaven do not need men to worship them. They are not chaos cultists begging for souls. They do not require altars in your village square. They need only one gift from mankind. What? That when a miner hears chittering beneath the floor, his master calls him drunk. When a child sees yellow eyes in the drain, her mother tells her not to invent stories. When a soldier finds clawed footprints in a plague pit, the captain writes wolf. When a priest speaks of ratmen, his bishop tells him panic is deadlier than truth. Matthias pointed to the cracked wall. They need us to laugh at witnesses. The words struck harder than a sermon. Disbelief is a fortress with no walls, Matthias said. It looks strong from inside because every man agrees not to see the enemy, but there is no stone, no ditch, no gate. Nothing stops the knife. Nothing stops the plague. Nothing stops the tunnel from opening beneath the nursery. Tomas remembered the little burned scrap whispering, I told him. He remembered the confession. I made it easier for their killers to return unseen. He remembered the ratman behind the wall squealing, No, believe. Then belief is a weapon, he said. No, Matthias answered. Attention is a weapon. Belief without discipline becomes superstition. Superstition wastes powder on shadows and hangs innocent men because a goat looked at them strangely. Attention gathers evidence. Attention tests claims. Attention listens before it laughs. The distinction mattered. Tomas wrote it down with shaking fingers. Matthias began closing the plague case properly. Each ledger was inspected, resealed, and laid back into place. Burned scraps were collected in a silver dish. The dead rat from the earlier lesson, the one with wire tied to its leg, was placed in a separate jar. The severed claw remained wrapped beside Tomas's journal. When the last book was inside, Matthias shut the black oak lid. The locks clicked one by one. The chamber seemed to breathe easier. Tomas did not. What happens if I tell others? He asked. Some will laugh, and if I show evidence, some will ask why it is not better evidence. And if I show the claw, some will say it is a mutant's hand, a beast's paw, a fraud, a trick of preservation, anything but what it is. Then what is the point? Matthias lifted the black oak case. The point is not to convince every fool. The point is to keep enough men awake. He moved toward the vault door, then stopped. One final document. From inside his coat, he withdrew a small folded paper, newer than the others, written in Matthias's own hand. He gave it to Tomas. The apprentice opened it. It was a list of towns: Altdorf, Noln, Middenheim, Talabheim, Wurtbad, Feildorf, Delberds, Hergich, Marienburg. Beside each was a mark, a rat mark. Tomas looked up slowly. These are recent? Some. How recent? Matthias's eyes were colder than the stones. Recent enough. The vault's silence changed. It was no longer the silence of history. It was the silence of something just outside the lantern light, holding its breath. The Black Plague ended, Matthias said. The enemy below did not. That is why this lesson matters. Not because of what happened in 1111, because of what men will refuse to see tomorrow. Tomas folded the paper with care. What should I write? Matthias's voice was low. Write this. The Skaven are not made strong by our fear. They are made strong by our embarrassment. They thrive in the pause before a witness speaks, in the smirk before a magistrate listens, in the ink stroke that changes claw to wolf and tunnel to subsidence. Tomas wrote. And the last line. The witch hunter stepped into the corridor, lantern held high, its light stretched long and thin over the stairs, over the walls, over the floor where dust lay undisturbed except for one narrow scratch leading downward. Disbelief is a fortress with no walls, Matthias said, and the rats are already inside. Tomas closed his journal. Behind them, deep in the sealed vault, something small laughed once in the dark. This time neither of them pretended not to hear it.